Guys, it's Pastor Brett with today's daily Bible reading. Let me start with a question. Where do you get your help? Where do you go to when you need support, when you need a way forward, a way out of a jam, right? For some of us, it's family, right? I'm calling Dad. Hey, Dad, can I borrow a couple $100? Maybe for you, it's your retirement account or an investment account that you have. Maybe for you, it's the government. Maybe for you, it's the free market. Maybe it's in the trophies that you've accumulated, the toys that you've accumulated, and your family. I think it's a really powerful question to ask. Now, we all want to be able to say, well, I go to God, right? I go to God when I need help. But the reality is, day in and day out, most of us, we don't. And that's not unique to us. That's the story of God's people time and time again. And God in His faithfulness and His patience and His kindness to us keeps saying, all right, guys, come back. All right, guys, put your eyes on me. I'll give you what you need. I got what you need in this life. Let's look at a psalm which has become very famous. You're going to probably recognize some of the wording of this psalm because of worship songs in the last couple decades. But I think we need to look a little deeper to see what it's really saying, because we got to get beyond the cliche that we might find in our coffee cup or even in some of our songs and ask, what is David referencing here? Let's look together. Psalm 121. We're going to read the whole thing, 8 verses. Let's go. I lift my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Indeed, he who watches over Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord watches over you. The Lord is your shade at your right hand. The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you from all harm. He will watch over your life. The Lord will be watching over your coming and your going, both now and forevermore. Now, it's a beautiful verse, right? Beautiful language here. I lift my eyes up to the mountains. Where does my help come from? For many of us, we've been taught to think of that as a reflection as we look up in the mountains and we think of the majesty of God and we're reminded of His care and provision. But I would submit that's not what David had in mind as he originally wrote this. We know that much of the false worship of Israel happened up on mountains. Scholars argue that when David says, I'm looking up to the mountains, he's likely has his eyes on the temples and the statues and the poles that were part of the worship to Baal, one of the rival gods, the Canaanite gods in that area. And we know again and again the Israelites were seduced, were brought astray by the worship of their neighbors. They wanted the kind of concrete protections that those gods promised them. If you make this sacrifice, you'll have good crops this year. If you do that, this God will look out for you. You do that, and the sun god will be merciful not to burn up your crops. You do that, and the moon god will give you light by night so you don't get injured. I think we often want the same thing, right? We want a God who says, well, if I just show up at church, nothing bad will happen to me. If I give this much in the offering, then God will bless me in that way. If I follow Him and trust Him all my days, none of my family members will get hurt. But David takes us deeper. He says, I lift up my eyes to the mountain, right? I look up at the Asher poles and the altars to Baal, and he asks the question, where does my help come from? Not from there, but from God. And he makes this series of contrasts. I think he's contrasting the God of Scripture with the God of Baal. The God who is the maker of heaven and earth, the maker of all things. The God who will provide you shade. He won't. What does this mean? The sun will not harm you by day, nor the moon by night. Like, how does the moon harm you? But again, I think David has in mind the promises of these false gods, the God of the sun and the God of the moon. If you don't follow their ways, they would warn, the sun will hurt you, destroy your crops. The moon will not give you light at night. And David is saying, no, it is not those things. It's not those false gods that bring me hope. It's God, the creator of heaven and earth. It's God, Yahweh, who watches over my coming and my going. He's the God of all things, right? Genesis 1 tells us this whole earth is his temple. He sits and he rests in it. He's not a God just of one nation. He's a God of all the earth. He's not a God of just the sun or the moon or the rain or the stars. He's the God of all creation, David reminds us. He's where we go for help. He's where we go when we have needs. And yet our hearts are tempted again and again by these lesser gods. And boy, we got lesser gods around us. We may not have altars to Baal and Asher poles, but we've got gods that tell us to find our identity in what we consume, how much I can buy, what kind of car I drive. It's really easy to justify that. I need it in my work. I need it for my lifestyle. All my other neighbors have it. At least I'm not buying a car like that. We find our identity before we know it in what we've consumed, what we've bought. It tells the story of our lives. Or maybe it's in our success. By the promotions that we had, the business opportunities we took advantage of, our intuition and ingenuity. And that's how we make our name for ourselves. Those things become our idols. Or maybe safety, security, comfort. Man, that looks a lot of different ways. Maybe it looks like that fear kind of keeps you from doing new things. It keeps you from the fullness of what God has called you to do in this world. And you're struck by fear or procrastination, or just by sitting idle. Or maybe for you, that same fear and that idol of comfort and security means you spend all your resources on, instead of trusting God for your daily bread, on making sure that you're set forever. You've got funds on top of funds, investments on top of investments. You've got cameras up. You're doing whatever you can to follow and find security and comfort. Jesus said, no, those things, they can't bear the weight of your soul. Success, consumerism, safety, security, they can't fill that hole in your heart that only Jesus can. This weekend, we're going to be talking about purpose, the purpose that God has made us for. And our purpose is found not in the stuff we accumulate, or the accolades that we rack up for ourselves. Our purpose ultimately comes from whose we are. Because we can look and we know our help does not come from Baal. I am not Baal's. I am not defined by consumerism, by success, or even by my failure. I'm God's child. The maker of heaven and earth watches over me. When we get that right, and we know our identity, all of a sudden, we're free to pursue our purpose in Him. But too often, we get those two mixed up. We want to find our purpose in all these other gods, all these other things, consumerism, success, safety, security, comfort. Once we find our purpose, we think we'll find our identity there, but we find out it's a mirage. It's an empty well. It can't give us what we think it promises. Just like the gods of Baal. So here David, he lifts his eyes up to the mountaintops. He sees the worship of the culture of everyone around them, and he says, no, not me. I am my God's. My identity is in Him. My purpose is in Him. What's one small step you could do today? One small step you could do to reinforce your identity in Him that might lead you to take a step away from those false identities our culture is trying to form us after. One small step, but the butterfly effect is that it means that it will have multiplication of impact in our lives when we make that one small shift. All right, God bless, guys. Cannot wait to connect with you this weekend. I will see you there.